one of the recent findings is that ageism also is youngerism, meaning that ageism as we know it and as we categorize it, or as we have kind of put this into a framework, is indicative of people who are significantly older. But heads up, because share with us who the audience is who's being most affected by it now.
Yeah, fascinatingly and surprisingly, it's younger women who are facing this at a rate in excess of those who are older in the workplace. So there was a new report that came out by McKinsey and Lean In, and what it suggested is that not only are women facing this in their younger years, 20s and 30s, at about twice the rate of their younger male peers, they're also actually getting more ageist remarks and having more trouble due to their age in the workplace than older women, which shocked me, I have to say. And I really want to dig more into that report. I was like, huh?
The idea of job security is outdated as a landline. If you haven't been in a search for a while, it's probable you will at some point, by choice or not. Most executives admit to staying way too long, or sense what's coming and justify staying anyway. Here, there's another reason. The faulty belief that navigating to what's next will inevitably be worse and has to suck. Screw that. Lauren Greif has spent a lifetime in corporate and executive search, calling bullshit on stale career advice that most still use. This is Career Blast in a Half, the career podcast for executives ready to cut past outdated career advice to fuel your outcomes now. So let's go.
Okay, so we're starting off by saying yay. And the reason why we're doing this is because it's not that often that you find somebody that you don't really even know, and it turns out that we have so much in common. And one of the things that Maureen Clough, who is the host of the amazing podcast called It Gets Late Early, and we'll say a little bit more about that in a latter sentence or two, is with us today. And her mission, my mission, are very, very closely aligned. And we are talking today about the boogie monster, the elephant in the room, this crazy, crazy systemic issue called ageism. Maureen Clough, please, for those who don't know who you are, tell us how you went from journalism, okay, to ageism with a pit stop in between in tech.
We love a nonlinear career, don't we? I mean, it's just nothing is a straight line. So, yeah, it's kind of a weird, circuitous path to where I am today. But I started out in journalism in New York City. I quickly noticed that there were many problems in journalism, but one of them was obvious ageism against women. And I am a woman. So I thought, this might be a career limiting move for me to stay in television. So I started to kind of dabble in other ideas of what I could do. And I wound up at Bloomberg. And that was my foray really into tech, if you will. And so I got there, I elder millennialed out, and I just kind of like got the next promotion, wanted to do a good job, really tried hard, eldest daughter, all that stuff, right? And then I kind of woke up one day and was like, do I even want to be doing this? And it was really kind of a big realization when I had a younger colleague who referred to me at age 37 as a dino. And I was like, first of all, how dare you? And then I was like, wait a second, he's kind of not wrong. And I looked around and I realized that I was one of the oldest people at my organization. It was a venture capital backed startup. And I was like, wait, where do all the older people go? And then when I started thinking back in my own career, I realized that even at sort of market leading companies that were industry, headliners that you would know, I saw the same thing to be true. And the people that were older were typically at least at the director level, if not beyond, senior director, VP. And then I started to unpack it and I was like, oh my gosh, I had intuited this issue. I had been thinking if I don't hit senior director, VP by 40, like I would lose my seat at the table. And so I am an ambitious person anyway, but I had this sort of gnawing sense that I had to make it, to have self-preservation. It was a defense mechanism too. And then when this all happened, I started asking around. I started asking people off the record. Obviously, I didn't have a podcast then. I was like, hey, are you guys worried about ageism? Are you worried about the upper out culture in tech? And like basically to a person, they're all like, yeah. Like, why is no one talking about this? Right. So that set me off on a path of trying to discover, is there really a problem here? Is this all just a gut intuition that's maybe wrong, not backed by data or surveys? Right. And what I found out, of course, is that no, it's extremely real. And fortunately, as of late, we've even received actual evidence from numbers, data. We love data in tech, that especially in the tech industry, it is a very underrepresented industry for people over 40. And that despite the fact that we as a population are aging rapidly, there is not the representative sample group that you would expect there. So I've gone off on sort of over the deep end. I joke that this is kind of like my midlife crisis. Like, what am I doing with my life? Okay, let's start a podcast. But here we are. And I'm just super passionate about it because, I hit 40. That was a big milestone. And I have to tell you, I just realized I'm not done yet. And like, no one should tell me that I should fade into the recesses or be, to borrow a typical Gen Z term, like not main character energy, right? Like who says I have to step back? And I'm a huge feminist, meaning I think women and men should have the same rights, right? So I'm just like, and I see it as worse for women too. So I just got a fire lit under me, and this is the one thing coming for all of us. This is the one ism that will hit everyone, and in a divided world that we have, let's all fight this. Come on, let's go.
So you mentioned, you see it happening in tech, and prior to the show, I did a little hey, FYI, right? If you're not in quote unquote tech as the said vertical industry, we're still talking to you. And what I mean by that is everything, and its mother, brother, sister, and faraway cousin is related to tech. And tech we're just using as kind of the bellwether for all the industries that are impacted: fintech, edtech, medtech, martech. Everything is tech now. So please listen to this with an ear that says, "Hey, I'm in this audience," because you are, and you're always welcome here, because this applies to all of us, and you've probably experienced this. And FYI, in case you're listening, you can't actually see us. Congratulations to you on your 40th. And I just recently turned 60. So we got 20 years gaps here. And so I just want to let you know,
Happy
hey,
birthday.
thanks. And I'm not done yet. In fact, I'm just getting started.
Woohoo!
And it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter how old you are listening to this, because one of the recent findings, and I know you just had a guest to talk about this, is that ageism also is youngerism. Meaning that ageism as we know it, and as we categorize it, or as we have kind of put this into a framework, is indicative of people who are significantly older. But heads up, right? Because share with us who the audience is who's being most affected by it now.
Yeah, fascinatingly and surprisingly, it's younger women who are facing this at a rate in excess of those who are older in the workplace. So there was a new report that came out by McKinsey and Lean In, and what it suggested is that not only are women facing this in their younger years, 20s and 30s, at about twice the rate of their younger male peers, they're also actually getting more ageist remarks and having more trouble due to their age in the workplace than older women, which shocked me, I have to say.
Shocked
And,
me too.
I,
And
I
then
really want to dig more
yesterday,
into that report. I was like, huh?
yeah, I did some digging in there too. And it was women in their early 30s. And it was a lot of, age bias, sexual bias, a lot of heckling and things at a very, very early age. And then just yesterday, another report came out that I'm going to cover maybe this week from Forbes, citing the study from McKinsey, 10-year announcement of their Lean In study, and just a few needle movers, and some of them are not moving in the right direction. So this is
sadly not
systemic,
surprising.
like I said. So
Yeah.
okay,
Women are
so
never the right age,
we're never the right age, and we never have
Too
enough
young, too
experience or
old.
too much. Yeah, it's like the
Oh my gosh.
Goldilocks syndrome to life. But one of
Precisely.
the things that you have said repeatedly, and I am so on board with this, is that you emphasize this importance of internal change when talking about ageism. And you've given a little bit of your own, like, hey, like I don't want to be called a dino. I'm 40. Get to decide when I want to be, done or not, or continue or reboot or whatever that is happening. But how could we, as listeners to this, people that are really, really feeling maybe even a level of shame, what does that actually mean? How do we take all the rhetoric, the media, the beauty industry, the bro culture? How do we metabolize all of this so that we are, without
That's
choking, and be able to turn this into something that is fuel in not even a go fight win way? How do we get to the place that you talked about, which said, I got to a place that is, like, I don't even know, like, I could never have said this 10 years earlier. How do we get to that grounded place where we just get to?
Well, I will say I think I have a lot of work to do on it even still. And I think most people do, right? It's something that's been drilled in us since a very young age. Stereotypes about older people are seen in kids as young as age 4. They'll spout off these things. And it's like, I'm not teaching my kids that. And they actually have said, Mom, you're old, things like that. So it starts young, and it's just these societal messages that people are interpreting and internalizing. So it's a tough pill to swallow. It's a tough thing to overcome for sure. But in terms of how I've become more open and more out there with the way in which I feel, and more comfortable enough to even have a public conversation like this, I mean, gosh, I think a lot of it really comes down to life experience and just realizing that I can do tough stuff. Like, I can get through things that I think are insurmountable, and then I still survive. And it's like, oh, the sky didn't fall. And that builds up a certain amount of confidence. And I've had enough career pivots, if you will, at this point, enough missteps, frankly, and I've still come out on the other side okay. And so that has instilled with me a sense of peace and a sense of purpose and a sense of drive, because I know I'm going to be able to get through. So a lot of it is just having that experience under my belt. I was thinking earlier today actually about a professor that I had in college, and I asked him to write a recommendation for me. And one of the things he said was, Maureen is not the most voluble student in the class, meaning like I just kind of sat back and was afraid to speak up. And I thought, gosh, I got to reach out to that guy, because he's probably like, wow, you're different now. Like, I used to be so concerned about saying the wrong thing and having people think that I was stupid or like uninformed. And, even when I joined new companies and new spaces where understandably I was learning, I remember having such a reluctance to ever just indicate like, hey, I don't know what that term means. Like, I got to a tech company and I was like, what's an ERP, enterprise resource plan? I didn't know what that meant. And why should I? I was new, right? But I feel like maybe particularly women have a hard time with that because we are underestimated so much, right? But all of this just frankly life experience has gotten me to a place where I'm like, everything's going to be okay. Like, just do it. And you know what? I'm fully aware that there are plenty of tech companies, if I wanted to stay in tech, who would never hire me after having had this open public conversation. But I think there are just as many who would, simply because I had the open, honest conversation. So I was like, this conversation matters so much, and our society is so ageist that sadly, because I'm 41 years old, I think more people might be willing to listen in a way, like, which is so screwed up, so screwed up. And so I'm like, I got to do this. It's really important for everybody who comes behind me and for the people who are already ahead of me. Like, this needs to be called out. So I really just, I think it's something that we women, you mentioned the anti-aging beauty industry and all of that, like, we really struggle with it. And I think part of that is just the very fact that we're mortals. We're all going to die someday. And I think when we recognize signs of that, maybe subconsciously it bothers us, right? But we've been sold these lies that getting older is bad. And I have seen it be the exact opposite. So I am trying to remind myself of that, even when I have a thought creep in my head that's unwelcome, like, your bags are, worse under your eyes, or, oh, maybe you should go get some Botox. Like, these thoughts come up for me all the time. Like I struggle
Mhm.
with them. And I think a lot of women do. And I think all of this mentality will start to shift as we see more and more people out there loudly saying, it's not over, keep going, I can do it, you can too. And we see representation, in companies across all of corporate, all of, different industries. And we see people in the media industry. We're seeing an increase in the number of women on screen, men on screen, over 40, over 50, which used to be like very slight percentage, right? And that stuff really matters. If you can see it, you can be it. That stuff, it's cheesy, but it's true. So I just,
Yeah.
I really
I
feel like
mean,
that's going to help shift all of our mentalities.
just recently, and thank you for this, you called Indeed out, right? Yeah, you. And you actually made them make a marketable change. And part of this was
Not just
that,
me, but yeah,
yes, not just
it was a
you,
group effort.
it was a group effort, but in this visual, this infographic, it showed um different different age bands, and then when it got to, I think it was at 55 plus,
55 to 65. Because
55
after
to
65, you can't work.
65, and it was basically like, wave goodbye. Like, this is like,
Yeah.
this is, you should be
Bye.
planning your exit now. And with your help and with other people, they actually made that correction. So my question back to you, and for all of us, including myself, is where can we advocate for that change? So should we be writing letters to places like Indeed? Who's listening, and who's willing to make those changes?
Mm. That's a great question. And the answer is I'm not sure. I'm not sure who's willing and who's listening. Indeed, for example, the CEO was called out multiple times. He's in decline, in his decline era, which was labeled as age 55 to 65. And just to be clear that everybody understands what we're talking about here, there was an Indeed career guide that was published on their website for over a year that labeled people's career stages by age bands. And late career was 45 to 55, and decline was 55 to 65. So congratulations, Lauren. You're in the middle of your decline era and
No,
you're
I'm
just
I
killing
I I'm like, I only my runway is getting shorter by the
right?
second. It
Only
says
five
Indeed.
years left. Yeah, it's so ridiculous. But so, Chris Hyams in decline himself, the CMO, Jessica Jensen of, I think that's her name, might not be, I should double check. The CMO of Indeed actually said publicly, we're sorry, we took it down, it's our bad. And that's great. I'm glad that there's a public apology. I'm glad that they took the actual guide down off the website right away, very, very swiftly, I might add, much more swiftly than LinkedIn did when they had that horribly ageist ad. I don't know if you saw that one, but it was real
Oh
bad.
yeah.
But they took 4 months. Indeed, overnight. It was quick. So great. But there still is a huge question as to whether any systemic change is underfoot at Indeed. Because, I mean, tell me you don't hire people on your editorial content team without telling me you don't hire people over 40 on your editorial content team for putting that thing on the website, right? So, and this is the number one job site in the world. Like, this was a really, really damaging thing to have happened. And so it kind of just leaves a question in my mind, especially since their PR team wouldn't let them come on the show, even though they had indicated interest. It kind of leaves me with the question of, is there any real lasting change to come of this, or are they just hoping to sweep it under the rug, right? And just move on to the next news cycle. And lucky for them, there's plenty of news going around. But so I don't know how much real change will be afoot because of this. What I will say is that people aren't willing to take it lying down anymore. People freaked out over this. And Indeed, in a way, I want to thank for publishing this because it enabled us to have this public conversation. And what they did was actually just reflect pretty much current sentiment by a lot of different companies. Like, unfortunately, that's how a lot of companies actually think about the workforce. And it needs to change. So we were enabled to have that big conversation because of their blunder. But yeah, again, it just shows you in a very, very tangible way why age diversity and age inclusion matters at organizations. Because if you had an age diverse team at that company at that time on that content group, there's no way in hell that would have ever seen the light of day, because it's so incredibly ageist and offensive.
And this is like the perfect segue into this next topic, which is like,
Oh, good.
You have made this so rich and embedded in the whole DE&I culture, right? Ageism, we ageism is a subset of things that happen within this umbrella of DE&I. But what the F? So many of these budgets are being compromised.
I
And so
know.
how do we, I mean, it's not just the budgets are being compromised, it's that the entire initiative has been deprioritized. Now, sure,
Yeah.
there may be more changes depending on which way the election goes, and who really knows what that aftermath looks like. But my question
It
back
really
to you is, okay, let's just say there's no changes in corporate America. There's no changes with, companies like Indeed. What can we do? Because you and I both agree we're not lying down, and a lot of the folks that we are speaking to, whether it be on podcasts or on LinkedIn or even in life, for goodness sakes, they are influenced by this hype or this marketing messaging that says XYZ, you're dino or you're dead, you're declining. And how do we get out from underneath it? Where can we go? What can we do? How do we advocate for ourselves without necessarily um, becoming angry? Or maybe it's good to be
Hmm.
angry.
I don't know how to help with the anger part, but I will say, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. So, first of all, I would say that helping, okay, so the DEIB component is only one part of the equation that's going to actually get us to lasting change. So, the way I look at it is DEIB initiatives and talking to talent acquisition and recruitment about the value of age inclusion. That's sort of the tip of the spear. They're the gatekeepers, right? They get talent in the door to see the hiring managers. And the hiring managers are the other part of the equation, because who makes the ultimate hiring decision? Not TA, not recruitment, the hiring managers, right?
Totally.
So these organizations need this training, need this knowledge to pass through the entire organization. It can't just be at the top with the DEIB, right? So those budgets might get slashed, or there's maybe less opportunity there. But I still think that plenty of companies will actually care about it in some meaningful way. Might be less money there, but that's just one part of the equation. And the other part is really just getting to company management and company leaders and showing them what the value of experienced workers and people across the spectrum of age can do for their company in terms of innovation, productivity potential, and ultimately at the end of the day, making money, right? Because that's all they actually care about. Let's be real. So there is some research that's coming out of the London School of Economics Inclusion Initiative about the multi-generational potential of teams when it comes to productivity. And so I'm really hopeful that information will be a helpful way to broach the topic in organizations. But I think coming through with more tangible stories of how multi-generational teams have created more impact revenue wise is going to be really critical to this, because no one is going to do anything more than a performative nonsense sort of PR stunt as they do in, greenwashing and the environmental movement, right? Like no one's going to do it unless they realize they're leaving money on the table by not doing it. So I think what will be interesting, we have a lot of things coming in right now. We have AI, we have layoffs, we have, RTO layoffs, basically quiet layoffs where they're like, hey, come back to the office because we don't want to actually pay you out severance or unemployment, which drives me insane, which, by the way, impacts experienced talent, women, very, very much more so, I would say, because representatively, they are a bigger,
Yeah, the home.
bigger percentage of the remote worker and hybrid worker population.
Totally.
So I don't want to say I'm like rooting for companies not to do well, because that feels really mean, but also if the ones who let all these experienced people leave are not doing great afterwards, I'm going to be like, look at what happened. And so I really hope we can get to a ton of research about the impact of those people's departures, right? And I mean, think about the CrowdStrike outage a few months back, right? And all the jokes that were going around, how like, oh, the intern was left to hit push to production. It's like there's a value, and my condolences to interns everywhere for being the butt of that joke. But like the point is, you have to have people who are across a span of ages and experience levels at an organization so that you can help one another achieve the highest impact at a company, period. And if you had, it's just, I find it very hard to believe that there was a super experienced dev who was like forgetting to put stuff in production and development before production. It's just like, ugh. So a lot of things, not sure if I answered the question completely because it was kind of multi-pronged, but I think we are allowed to get angry. I think it's okay to get angry. As far as broaching the topic, I think as much as we can find research or compelling evidence of people working together as teams, that's great. And then I also think that because our population is aging so quickly, some of this will kind of naturally course correct because there's a talent shortage, right? And so they need to fill people in these jobs, and those people are going to be getting older, right? So there might be some sort of natural course correction. And then on top of that, I would say that if, and this is a big if we see outcomes from, for example, the lawsuit that was levied against X, Twitter, and Elon Musk. Yeah. So recently there was a lawsuit against Twitter about laying off disproportionately people over age 50. And, on its face, and this is a very important call out, on its face, that doesn't necessarily mean there was age discrimination. It could have been cost cutting. And oftentimes older employees have higher salaries, right? But if there's also something, for example, as like the CEO of the company saying perhaps something around how older people will asphyxiate society, which is something that Elon Musk has said, not surprising coming from that guy. But he said that and allegedly other sorts of ageist remarks, which led this lawsuit in part to go forward. So it allegedly had enough merit to allow for it to proceed through the court system. Now I'll say, if there's a big fat goose egg there, this does nothing but create a complete chilling effect for age discrimination claims. So my hope is that there's some merit to this case, because otherwise people are going to be like, that's baloney. They just were trying to cost cut, and it's going to actually hurt, I think, other future age discrimination cases. But so some people are going to get mad. They're going to sue. Hopefully they have merit, right? And they're not, just looking for something, right? But we need to educate people about what age discrimination really is, what it looks like. They need to have all of the information handy when they find themselves in a layoff situation. Companies are doing some really shady stuff out there, Lauren. I mean, I get DMs all the time about companies that lay off certain people in a certain department, backdate the date of their separation agreement, which, you're supposed to have a certain amount of time by law. I think it's 45 days if you're over age 40 to look at an agreement and decide whether or not you want to sign it. And I've also heard of companies that include, there's the older, I'm going to mess up the name of it because, I'm going to call it an acronym and be like, oh, I missed it. But there's the OWBPA, which is like the Older Workers Benefits Something Act, something like that. And it tells companies that they have to, in order to comply with this law, they have to, when they do a layoff and people are over the age of 40, who are affected, they have to provide those people with a list of the people in their department and not the names, the list of the titles of the people in their department and their ages. And they have to show who was laid off and who remained. So I've heard from a lot of people who've said they've received incomplete accounting of their department so that it might look a little bit more palatable. But again, a lot of people don't know their rights.
That's like an age audit, right?
Exactly, because it's supposed to be a protection under the ADAA of 1967, since there's not supposed to be any age discrimination over the age of 40. Under 40, sadly, nationally, federally, you're allowed to do whatever you want. Be like, you're fired for being 36 if you want, which is messed up. But so there've been some sort of permutations of these lists going out that don't make a ton of sense. And, my thought initially is they don't bank on you knowing your rights. And they bank on you needing to sign that severance agreement to get paid out and keep your health insurance. So most people, they're going to just sign it. And then this stuff persists. And it's just, it's gross. And it's allowing these systems to perpetuate this sort of discrimination to perpetuate. And it's systemic in nature. It's really, really frustrating. So if we see an age discrimination case go forward and actually have merit and have the suit settled or actually get fined and everything by the EEOC, that's going to be, I think, helpful. But I also question, how much is that fine going to be? Will it move the needle enough for companies to care? So again, it all comes back to, will they make more money if they have people across an age spectrum? And if not, I don't think we're going to see much change.
Thank you for joining today. We appreciate your listening ears. Big time. We ask this: use these tools, not tomorrow, right now. and share them by spreading the love, leaving us a rating and subscribe so you don't miss the next Career Blast in a Half. Most of all, thank you for you.